Good. Welcome to the NCLA GRS Help webinar series. This is our 28th webinar, so we're very excited about that. And today we have Rosalind Tedford, who is going to talk to us about congressional research. Roz is the Director for Research and Instruction at the Z. Smith Reynolds Library at Wake Forest University. She earned her BA in English and Psychology, as well as her MA in English from Wake Forest and an MLIS from UNCG. In addition to managing the research and instruction programs at Wake, she teaches 4-credit information literacy courses and is the liaison to both the political science and communication departments. And she's presented at a bunch of conferences, LOEX, ACRL, ALA, and other places on different topics.
So like Linda said, I am the Director for Research and Instruction at Wake Forest and the liaison for politics and international affairs. A couple things up front. 19 years ago when I started here at ZSR, my first job was in the government documents and microtext departments. And although I've had lots of other jobs along with atlases, government documents still sort of have a really soft spot in my heart. And so this was really exciting to get to do that. I know there are probably people who have varying levels of experience with congressional research, so I hope there'll be something in this for everybody. So let's talk about what I'm going to do. So I'll give a few caveats. We're going to go back in time and take you back to high school civics because that will help you sort of navigate congressional research. We'll talk about what Congress produces, how it gets used by researchers, although I could never give an exhaustive list because it is used in such a myriad of ways. I'm going to give you some ideas of where that content may live for free or in for-fee databases. Hopefully we'll have time for a couple of auxiliary services for Congress because they can really be gold mines of information, and then there'll be time for questions and answers at the end. So we'll start with the caveats. First off, I have oversimplified this in some ways. The workings of Congress are incredibly detailed, and there is actually more information that comes out of it in fits and starts than I thought it was wise to go into on this. So this is really a basic level look at where the majority of researchers are going to need information out of Congress. I focused it on 3 primary buckets of content they produce. And so for some of you out there, if you're really experienced government documents librarians, then it may seem a bit of an oversimplification, and I realize that. But my idea here was for those people who only occasionally answer government information questions, then this would be useful for them. For those who need much more detailed assistance, I've got some links at the end of some great things. A second thing I will say is that to this day, government documents, government information librarians are the single greatest and most useful source of information for help in these areas, and I've got some ideas at the end about how to get in touch with them. But I find them, the ones that I know, such a great help. So there are a lot of other resources in the state, whether it's from UNC and Beth Rowe and her staff at the at our regional depository or other things, that there are great places to go here in the state, all over the country, for more in-depth help on these sorts of issues. So let's go ahead and start looking a little bit at what we all feel when we start answering government documents question, which is, boy, I wish I'd paid more attention when I had high school civics classes. And when I started 19 years ago, it was a crash course. I had to sort of relearn how our government works in order to be able to help people. So Congress, particularly, established in Article 1 of the U.S. Constitution. It's broken down into a House and a Senate. The House has 435 members, Senate has 100. Most people know this sort of thing, elected every 2 years. 2 differences between the House and Senate in terms of their responsibilities. The House is the one that has to initiate revenue-raising bills, so any tax bills start in the House, and so we're hearing a lot about that now, tax reform and that sort of thing. But that's a good thing to know, whereas the Senate is the one that ratifies treaties and approves presidential appointments, so all of those confirmation hearings and those sorts of things come out of the Senate. The House initiates impeachment process, and the Senate decides impeachment processes. So those are the 2. There are other little differences. There's differences in procedures and differences in in vote taking and that sort of thing. But those are the main sort of differences. One thing to realize, and if you haven't worked a lot with congressional documents, this is something that takes a little bit of getting used to, but the way Congress works is that they meet for 2-year Congresses, each with 2 sessions. So frequently you will see citations to things that talk about the ex-Congress first or second session. So currently, right now, we are in the 113th Congress first session, and that can become really important as you are looking into finding things, because sometimes people only know, or they only have something that tells you what Congress it was in, and then you have to sort of cross-reference that to figure out what year and that sort of thing. And the first or second session can also be important because that can be a year designation as well. So next we'll talk a little bit about how a bill becomes a law, and I have a link at the end to that really amazing Schoolhouse Rock video about this, but I didn't want to play that for everybody. This is a really great graphic that I found from Votocracy, and this sort of explains it, and you'll see this again because I'm going to bring this up during each of the discussions of the types of congressional information that's out there, but it's important to kind of remember the process that Congress goes through when it is taking a bill from an idea all the way to get it to the president's desk. So a bill generally starts out in either the House or the Senate, and it gets a number as soon as it is introduced. And Senate starts out with an S, and the House starts out with HR. But then it is given to a particular subcommittee or committee, and that committee debates, rewrites, reworks, edits, seeks information, input, has hearings, all of that sort of thing, until it actually has got it to the point where they want the entire committee to vote on it. Then the entire committee votes, and if they vote yes on it, then the committee writes a report, and the bill is sent to the floor of the House for reading and for voting on. And then there is a full vote in the House, assuming it is not filibustered or sent back to committee, and then at that point, or the Senate, same, then it has to go to the other place. So if it started in the Senate, it's got to go to the House. If it started in the House, it's got to go to the Senate. There has to be an agreement before an actual act can come out of it and get sent to the president, at which point they, of course, hope he signs it. Sometimes he vetoes it. But that's, in general, the process. So it goes from a particular congressperson or group of congresspeople to a committee where they edit, fight about it, have hearings about it, goes to the full House or Senate where they vote, and then it goes to the other House. And sometimes there's joint committees that come together to work it and tweak it. Often it gets passed by one House. We've seen this a lot lately. It gets passed by one group, the House or the Senate, and then never goes anywhere in the other one. And so we've seen that a lot lately with the divided Congress that we have. A couple of tips and tricks for congressional research. Names matter, and they do change over time. They have changed over time, and that can sometimes impact how you do, how you help people do research. So bills and acts, they are numbered, and then they also sometimes are given a name, and then sometimes they're also given a nickname. So to go into a database of congressional hearings and search on Obamacare, you aren't going to find it. You're going to need to know what the actual name of it was or the number, and it was the Affordable Care Act. That's actually a shortened version of it. But publications in and of themselves change names over time. So Annals of Congress started out, it is now what we call the Congressional Record, but it was actually 4 different titles before it became the Congressional Record. Various agencies change and the names of committees change, and new committees are added, committees are retired. So sometimes a committee that has a particular name now isn't the same name as the committee that might have considered a similar idea 100 and 150 years ago. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. If you can get your hands on names, numbers, or dates, it can make your life a lot easier in congressional research. It's not mandatory, but it is easier if you have the name of a particular congressperson who introduced a bill, for example, or what Congress and what session it was in, or the particular day, date, or even a week of the vote or the floor discussion or hearings. Any of those sorts of things that you have, a bill number is especially useful. can be really, really helpful when you're doing congressional research. Again, it's not impossible to do it without it, but it's super useful if you have it, especially in some of the bigger databases. If you have a known number to search on, then it makes it really easy to get exactly where you want to go. So let's look at the major publications of Congress. And again, this is sort of oversimplified. There are some other things that, that come out of Congress that I'm not going to talk about today. But essentially, there are the hearings, there's the serial set, and there's the Congressional record. Those are the three big things. I'm also going to talk a little bit at the end about Congressional Budget Office reports and the Congressional Research Service reports, and we'll touch on legislative histories. All right, so let's go back to our how does a bill become a law, and look at where exactly the hearings happen. The hearings happen during the committee process. So not everything that happens inside a congressional committee actually takes place during a hearing. A hearing happens when they need external input. So there are committee meetings that happen behind closed doors or technically open if you want to, but not all of that information always makes it out to the public. Congressional hearings take place while a particular committee is sort of gathering information in order to take this bill and adjust it and make all the changes that they need to make before they take it to the full House or the full Senate. There are subcommittees on some committees. Some committees are so big that they have subcommittees. In general, what happens in those subcommittees is really hard to find. And there may be some of you out there who are better at GovDocs who know of good places to go for subcommittee stuff. But in general, the stuff that that gets out to the public is out of the main committees and not from subcommittees. So that's where the committees happen. So what are they? They are a meeting of a Senate, House, Joint, or Special Committee of Congress. They are used to obtain information and input from external people. We've all seen those committees where they bring in the Secretary of Defense, or they bring in witnesses, they bring in people to testify, they bring in the CEOs of Exxon after the Exxon Valdez. Whatever that may be, they use these hearings to gather information about particular legislation. Sometimes they aren't particularly about legislation. They are just to find out more about what's happening. So there were all sorts of hearings after 9/11, all sorts of hearings, other things. They contain really amazing amounts of data and testimonies from a really wide variety of sources, and so they can be incredibly rich and very, very detailed. I'll go ahead and put a caveat in here, and this goes for everything. When you are working with someone who is looking for congressional information, what at least I find, and I work primarily with undergraduates doing sort of public policy research and that sort of thing, I frequently find that what they really want is a discussion of the policy, and if actually what they end up with is a full-blown committee hearing about a particular proposed policy, it just simply is too dense. And there's too much there, and it's not necessarily organized in the way that they really need it organized. So that reference interview can become really, really important when they come up to you and say, I need a hearing to sort of probe a little bit deeper. What are they researching? What do they need a hearing for? Maybe what they're really looking for is the congressional record. They want the floor debates on or something else. So to really sort of probe a little bit and figure out exactly what they want, because there's no sense getting them into these really dense hearings or the serial set or whatever, unless that's really going to answer their research question. So I'll just put that out there. That's true about all of the things that I talk about today. And you get, in general, congressional hearings are published 2 months to 2 years after they are held. Some are never published. There are, ProQuest Congressional has a lot of the unpublished hearings in it. Of course, it's an expensive database, but there are some ways of getting your hands on those things that are never published, but it can be kind of tricky. I will say that frequently the fact that they don't come out to the public for 2 months to 2 years after they are held can sometimes be in this sort of immediate news environment. People hear a hearing come on, they come in the next day and they want the transcript of that hearing, and that's not as easy to get because the hearings do have to go through a publication process to get to the publishers, to get to the places that they are available online. I just double-checked ProQuest Congressional because we have a subscription to it, and they list all the hearings, even hearings from last week, but they don't actually link to the full text of them because they aren't available yet. So that delay can sometimes be tough for patrons to handle when they're writing a paper that's due tomorrow and they need a hearing that was held yesterday. There are places you can sometimes get that, C-SPAN and that sort of thing, but how are they used? This should have probably been a caveat at the beginning. Anything that has to do with America, you can use this congressional information for. So whether that's American history, whether it is public policy, foreign affairs, war, nuclear policy, environmental policy, there's an incredibly wide range. What we in general see our faculty and students using hearings for is researching a particular issue or policy, or even looking at the sort of inner workings of Congress. So committee power plays, who's chair, what happens in those hearings among the committee members can sometimes be a really interesting insight to how Congress is working. I do have people that research special interests or they're researching particular people and they find out that they testified before Congress about something, and so sometimes we get people coming in that just, they are writing a paper about a particular person, Steve Jobs, for example, and they want his particular testimony when he went up in front of congressional hearings. Can be used to track issues over time, evaluating the relationship between Congress and the administration, which can be really interesting, especially when it comes to confirmation hearings, how they are held, how people conduct themselves, you know, Anita Hill, all sorts of the Bork hearings, all of those sorts of things are of sort of perpetual interest, I think, to researchers. They can also be an incredible source of data because a lot of times these people who are coming in as witnesses are providing background data, and those are included in the hearings as they're published. That is a very minimal list of what they can be used for. I'm sure each of you out there have had patrons that that have had other uses for this kind of information. But how do you find them? So the depository system, most of you are probably familiar with this, but there are libraries all across the country that participate in the Federal Depository Library Program. In a lot of them, we get print or microfiche hearings. More and more, we are not getting those in print or microfiche anymore. We are getting those only online, as most of them are online for free for the current and most recent Congresses. You can get them from the Federal Digital System, which is FDSys, from the 99th through the 113th Congresses, and so that's from 1985 to current, and they are continuing to digitize these and going backwards, I think. But currently, right now, it's only online for free. And again, another caveat is that there may be other places out there, either for a fee or for free, that I didn't find that you can get access to some. I tried to limit these lists to things that are fairly comprehensive, that don't just have 1 year or one hearing here or there, because there are, you know, Wikipedia links you to individual hearings and some of their things. I was looking for places that you could get sort of saturation of enough years that it would be useful. ProQuest Congressional and Westlaw are both databases that you can get congressional hearings in. Neither one of them are cheap, obviously. All right, so that's the hearing. So now let's look at the serial set. So the serial set is a much sort of wider and broader set of documents. And essentially, serial set includes materials that come in anywhere from the committee point all the way through the report they write that the House or the Senate committee writes when they send the bill to the entire House or Senate for a vote. So it's really comprehensive. It's a catch-all for a lot of different kinds of information, and it is an incredibly rich. You can lose yourself in serial set content, and sometimes this is what people really are looking for when they think that they want hearings. Sometimes what they really want are some of the materials that are in the serial set. What is it? This is a hard thing, and this even, and it's a two-slide thing, is an oversimplification. But it is essentially documents that are used as the committee is making their decision about a particular piece of policy. So they request information from various sources, and those are called the documents. And then it is also the information that the committee puts out along with the piece of legislation. They can cover an enormous number of things, and this is actually not even probably a partial list is being too generous to call this list of what all is included in the serial set. It technically contains, and I think this may not be complete either, but you have House and Senate documents, House and Senate reports, and then there's Senate treaty documents as well, because they're the ones that do the treaty. But essentially, the documents are the information coming into the committee, so they can request data from the EPA as they are considering the Keystone Pipeline. They can request information from external, from companies, from other outside researchers, from Congressional Research Service, from wherever. And this is so the documents, the House and Senate documents, are data that are coming into the committee. Sometimes it's letters, sometimes it's various statements from different people in the administration or outside the government in general that they use to help make their decision. It also can be things like celebrations of the 150th year of a building in Washington, and that sort of thing also comes in as House documents. The reports are things that the House and Senate committees write that accompany the legislation. So they report when you say they have reported out on the legislation that they are proposing, so the Affordable Care Act or some other piece of legislation, the Immigration Act. Accompanied with that go out to the full House and Senate are these reports that are written on various pieces of legislation. And they're not only about pending legislations, they can also be about their findings in an oversight thing. They can be a final report of a special committee that was investigating something in particular, misbehavior or something like that. That is sort of in a nutshell what the serial set is. It can frequently be the most informative of the documents that exist if what the researcher is trying to do is trace the development of legislation, look at the thought processes behind how did they decide that the Affordable Care Act would have, parts A, B, C, D, and F and all of that in there. Those documents can sometimes be incredibly rich. For those of you who are in depository libraries, these volumes over here may look kind of familiar. So they come out, those items, each report, each document comes out with an individual title and House document, 113-42, House report, 113-68. So they come out individually, and each of those individual items used to get sent to the depository libraries. And then after a certain amount of time, they get bound into these serial set volumes. So each serial set volume may contain, it may be one House report, if it's a really long House report, or it may be 15 or 20 House reports bound into a single volume. And so it's, so this, I don't know if you can see on the picture over here, that says Senate report, like 827 to 879. So it becomes tricky when you're looking at a citation, because the citation may be citing the specific Senate report. And then you've got to figure out which serial set volume it's in. If you can search these online, it's a lot easier, because if you know the name of the report or the document, then it's going to come up regardless of which serial set volume. But there's a lot of numbers involved in navigating the serial set, and it has really remarkable stuff in it. But it is online for free from Congress, from the 104th, the reports from the 104th Congress on, from the documents a little bit earlier. Then the Library of Congress has a chunk of the even earlier stuff from 1833 to 1917. And then if you want to pay for it, or if your library already has a subscription to this, then ProQuest, Congressional, Hein Online, and Redex has a separate serial set product out there. They do still come out in Fiche, and I'm assuming they're still binding them. We don't get them bound anymore or in Fiche anymore, so someone out there may be able to educate me if there's somebody out there from UNC. But I'm assuming they are actually still coming out bound. So what is it used for? It's used for a lot of different things. Again, if you're researching a policy, if you're looking at a particular Congress, if you want, if you have an interest in a particular person, and there was a document that came out that was a tribute volume. That's great, but there's also some really remarkable historical information in there. So there's several volumes in there that are about those early documents about the relocation of Native Americans. There are fascinating stuff about things like the Lewis and Clark expeditions with the letters that were coming in after requesting funding for the Lewis and Clark expedition. So there's really incredibly rich things. For a while, the annual reports of government agencies really early were published as part of the serial set. And so even now, even though we've sent our serials, our bound serial set, we have retained it, but we have sent it to our off-site facility since we have Congressional. Sometimes when I walk through our print collection, I will see serial set volumes in there because they were the Department of War annual reports, or the department, or some other department's annual report was in the serial set. So there's some of that executive branch bleed over. So the congressional record is often what, at least what I see at Wake Forest, students come up and say, I need the congressional record because they've heard of it, maybe they know about it, maybe their professor has mentioned it in class, but they don't really realize exactly what the congressional record is. And essentially, the congressional record is a record of what goes on the floor of the House and the Senate. So it is not committee hearings, it is not the legislation itself, it is what happens with the debates and the filibusters and the floor votes, all of those tribute speeches, all of those things that happen in front of the full House and the full Senate. So it is, it's an amazing primary resource for a lot of different researchers, but it's also, again, not all, someone's researching the Equal Rights Amendment. The congressional record will tell you, will give you exactly what was said for and against it. And I've done research in North Carolina. Senators do not come out well in that, but it gives you that actual stand up and speak out on the House. What it doesn't do is actually give you all of the debates and the hearings that were held about the Equal Rights Amendment. So you have to be careful when someone comes up and asks for the congressional record to make sure that what they really want is what was said on the House or Senate floor about something, and not the actual process of creating the legislation before it gets there. So it is the official record of the proceedings and debates of the United States Congress. Any of you who are familiar with the UK, it's similar to their Hansard debates. It went through 4 title changes. So it started out as the Annals of Congress for the 1st through the 18th Congresses. Then it became the Registers of Debates in Congresses from the 18th through the 25th. And it was the Congressional Globe from 33 to 73. And then it became the Congressional Record. So if someone comes in with a citation for one of those other titles, it's really, it's all the same sort of idea. So there are people actually sitting on the floor of the House and the Senate recording these. It used to obviously be someone writing it down. It was someone, professional recorders. Now I'm sure they actually physically record it as well as manually record what's going on. A couple of things that are interesting to know. First of all, members of Congress can revise or extend their remarks after they actually say them, and this happens a fair amount. And so to say that it is exactly what is said and nothing more and nothing less on the floor of Congress is a little bit misleading. People can, if they weren't there that day and they wanted to put in a particularly amazing speech that they had prepared, or if they only got 2 minutes and they really had 20 minutes worth of content, they can put things into the extensions to get them included. So in print, that is not always indicated. Now they use some different typefaces or indicate it with a bullet when that was extended. And I have a link, and I'll show you the URL for this particular presentation at the end, and you could go to the Library of Congress. They have a little bit more information about what exactly is in the congressional record. So it really is only about what happens in the floor debate and the actual votes of Congress. So there's a House section and a Senate section, obviously. That shows you what is said on the floor of each of those 2 different organizations. There is an extension of remarks. So those are speeches, tributes, and other clarifications not actually uttered. I just found this out earlier, and it was it was called an appendix for a while, and now it is called extension of remarks. So someone had a citation for something in the congressional record in the appendix. And sure enough, when we looked in the year that they were interested in, it was called the appendix at that point. It comes out as a daily digest, so every day, and this used to come onto depositories. We don't get it anymore. It may still come out in print, but I'm not entirely sure. So essentially a summary of what happens every single day on the floor. And then as they are bound up after they are official, after it has officially gone on the record, there's an index for each session of Congress by name subject. There are other things that are included in the congressional record, like if the president writes the Senate a letter, or if sometimes if there is a memorial service, someone dies, the memorials that are written about that person are also included in the congressional record, and that sort of thing. So there's a little bit more to it than simply what is said on the floor. So what is it used for? It is used to track debates on topics across time. So I had a student once looking at the debates on the Prohibition Amendment versus the Repeal Amendment, which was really kind of interesting. I work with political science and the communication department, and I have lots of faculty interested in political rhetoric, and that can be a really rich source of looking at the rhetoric of the civil rights debates, or the rhetoric of the the ERA amendment, those sorts of things. You can track members' record on particular issues. If it's a current member, there are probably easier places to go, Project Vote Smart and other places that you can look up your congressperson or senator's record or their voting patterns. But for older things, if you wanted to go back and look, at the, in 1850 or something, then you can use a congressional record to track all of the votes on a particular that have happened. It can also be used to demonstrate changes in procedure over time, so filibustering, that sort of thing. You can use that to kind of see how they use various rules and regulations that govern the two houses to their advantage and that sort of thing. So where can you get it? It is in print. It is also on microfiche, just like the other things. You can get this more places online for free. 1994 to present in the federal digital system. Thomas from Library of Congress has 89 to the present, so it goes back a little bit further. American Memory has that chunk of really, really early stuff. I just discovered, and I downloaded it because I'm just that big a GovDocs geek, a free congressional record app that goes back to 1995, so you can look up things and you can search it. So that's a screenshot of it over on the right. I don't. Obviously, C-SPAN does record what happens, so there are selected debates available in their video library. Again, ProQuest, Time Online, Westlaw, there may be other databases out there that have the congressional record online for a fee. ProQuest Congressional has all of these things that I've talked about in their entirety, and there's a separate collection for the serial set maps, because there's a lot of things in the serial set that had maps in it, and there are a few other things in ProQuest Congressional as well. So I wanted to talk, and it looks like I have enough time here for a couple of minutes on two auxiliary services to Congress. So this isn't so much information that Congress puts out to the world, but this is information that gets created for Congress that you can have access to, and that can be really, really remarkably useful. The first one is the Congressional Research Service, or the CRS. It is essentially Congress's think tank. It is a policy group. It's staffed by all sorts of amazing policy experts, statisticians, all of that. When a committee is doing research on something, they can request the Congressional Research Service provide them with data, statistics, information about a particular subject. The issue with CRS reports is that they are not, in general, published out there to depository libraries or out there to the public. They are for Congress, and you can get your hands on them by contacting your congressperson through a Freedom of Information request. But that's about it. There are some that are in the public domain that are out there. I will mention, and I'm really seriously not trying to do a commercial for ProQuest Congressional, But to me, when we were evaluating whether or not to get it, one of the best things it had, and that made it worth its money, is that it does have all of the CRS reports. And the Congressional Research Service publishes other things than just these CRS reports. They do other research things, but the ability to help students find those CRS reports. The nice thing about them is that sometimes they are really succinct and they're really analytical about a particular piece of policy. And for undergraduate students, sometimes that's a better look than to go through all of the hearings that a committee may have had or the actual act that they send to the floor of the House or the Senate. And CRS reports. They also do repetitive CRS reports over time, and so you can look at CRS reports about particular things over the decades and see how information's changed. There are some places that they can be found online. Sometimes you can Google their. There's some places that collect them on particular issues, particular legal issues, or whatever. So one that I just found that was published last July was called Youth in the Labor Force, Background and Trends. So if you had a student who was researching participation of young people in the labor force and the economic impact or minimum wage issues or whatever, this would be a really great, digestible, usable report that shows the trends and that sort of thing. So I'm a huge fan. They did publish a big microfilm collection called Major Studies and Issue Briefs of the Congressional Research Service that probably some of your libraries may also have. The other one, and this is a lot easier to get your hands on, is the Congressional Budget Office, and this is essentially the arm of Congress that analyzes economic impact of proposed policies and budget issues. It was created in 1974, economic data. Their reports are in print, SUDOC Y 10.2 if you all are a depository library, but they are online back to the 94th Congress, 1975, and forward. And they are really another place when students are really interested in the impact of a particular legislation. So they look at both potential impact of proposed legislations, but they'll also look for Congress at the impact of enacted legislation. So if you have students that are writing policy analysis or policy proposal papers, they can be really useful. So I found this one on their website yesterday, I think, the economic impact of the Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Integration Modernization Act. So it looks at what the potential economic impacts are going to be for that particular piece of legislation. And the last thing I wanted to mention, because sometimes this comes up and these can be good to know that they exist for particular students, is the idea of a legislative history. So as bills make their way through the House and Senate, frequently they start out as one bill, then they get merged with another bill, and they get a new number, and they go back to committee, and then they may get retired for a year or two, and then come back with a brand new number, and that sort of thing. And so sometimes if you're trying to track a legislation from the very first time someone had the idea to propose it, all the way through it getting signed into law and making its way into the U.S. Code or statutes at large or whatever, a legislative history can be really useful. Law students use this an awful lot, but there are other students for whom this can be useful. Now, it's not easy to do on your own, and so it used to be a major part, I think, of sort of law research training to teach students how to do this. Now, if you do pay for some of the for-fee databases, it does it for you. So this is a screenshot from ProQuest Congressional and their legislative history thing, and essentially, you can see down here, here's the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, right? So that is Obamacare. It tells you when it was enacted, the date. So all of that would be good information if you were doing more research on it, what Congress and session it was in, what public law it finally became, what rare it is in the statutes at large. But then it gives you every single House and Senate bill that had anything to do with it along the way. And so essentially, if you're trying to track that sort of the narrative of a particular idea or piece of legislation, these legislative histories can be really useful. It's good if you're going to use one of them, it is really good to know something, either a public law or one of the bill numbers or the name of it. ProQuest has a separate product to Congressional called Legislative Insight that our law school has purchased, but we have access to it as well. Do it. Hein Online, Westlaw, LexisNexis do it. Not every single piece of legislation out there sort of lends itself to a legislative history. If it was only one bill and it made its way through fairly easily to the vote and to the approval from the president, it's not. Legislative histories aren't that important. There are a lot of places out there on the web that gather particular legislative histories by topic. So here's the Department of Justice, for example, that has a bunch of legislative histories on particular justice-related laws. There is the Law Librarian Society of Washington, D.C., which is a really amazing website that has things on legal, that has some legislative histories out there where they have done the legwork on them. So you can sometimes find them on your own. I just wanted to mention those because sometimes they come up and they can be useful to point. A few links here that you can use. There is a thing here that shows you Congress and session number with the corresponding congressional record debates. I mentioned earlier the most amazing group of librarians, which are government document librarians. And so if this is something that you're new to and you know you're going to be spending a lot of time doing government information reference at your library, I highly recommend that you join the gov.gal listserv. It is hands down the quickest way to get answers to various and sundry government-related questions. The people on that list have an amazing background, institutional memory, and you can sometimes ask questions that you are just sure there's not a person on the planet that's going to be able to help you with, and then in 5 minutes back you'll come with 4 answers and great tips to help your researchers go on to the next level. So I use them, the sort of hive mind of gov.gal for those sorts of things. I did also link, because this is one of my kids' favorites, to the I'm Just a Bill Schoolhouse Rock. It's still pretty accurate depiction of how a bill becomes a law. There are numerous people out there who have done research guides particularly on congressional research. Some of them go much more into the sort of gray areas and do less of the oversimplification that I did for congressional research, and I linked to 3 of them. This is by no means the only ones that are out there. These are 3 that I have used in the past and drew on for this particular presentation. So anyway, there's an awful lot of great research out there and great information out there. Any questions that you may have? I do have a longer and a shorter URL for this particular guide on SlideShare, and that's my email address. You're welcome to email me things, and I can point you in the right direction. So I see one question here that is, if you didn't have resources to get all the paid databases, which would you say the most important one? And I guess I would throw that back to who your patrons are and what kind of research they're doing. So if it was, say, here, and it's mostly undergraduates, mostly doing public policy research and that sort of thing, I would probably try and go for the hearings in the serial set or the serial set. For that, there is, I mean, the CRS reports are a luxury, and they were sort of one of the things that tipped, you know, in addition to allowing us to get rid of a lot of our print resources. The ProQuest Congressional is nice, but that serial set is enormous, and it has such an incredibly rich amount of American history and political history and international history, as well as the hearings, that I might go for one of those legislative histories I would not pay for unless you have a law school, in which case they should be ponying up the money. CQ Researcher occasionally will link to congressional, occasionally will put in CRS reports. The problem is you can't just email CRS and ask for one of those reports. You have to go through a congressperson. But the one thing I didn't mention at the beginning is that there is no copyright on government information. And so once someone has a CRS report, nothing stops them from putting it up on a website or whatever. You can't republish it and make money, but you can share it out. It is essentially public domain because it's our tax dollars that pay for it. So you will find them sometimes linked to in Wikipedia articles and that sort of thing. But it it's a real hit and miss sort of thing. So the benefit of having them all in one place, like ProQuest Congressional, is that you don't have to know that one has been written. You can go and search across all of that information in there, and if there has been a CRS report on gun control or whatever, it'll show up. And then ProQuest Congressional, when you do a main big search, it then lets you facet by type. So you can just look at the hearings, just look at the serial set documents, just look at the CRS reports. And there are lots of people who have put in a Freedom of Information Act requests for CRS reports and have gotten them and have put them up on the web, random places. But again, it is kind of hit or miss.
Well, thank you everybody for coming too,
Yep.
and thank you again, Roz, for doing this. This was
not a problem. Happy to do it. We'll see you soon, Linda.